What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Something About Sports podcast. I am your host, Leon Edwards, once again. This is episode 6. Been a little while. Got a decent amount of stuff that I want to cover. This one may get a little bit long. If you guys have been listening, you'll know that I give that disclaimer more often than not. And it's because I love talking sports, and hopefully that comes through when you listen. But those of you guys that have been rocking with me, you've been listening, and you guys already know the drill. Nothing new to you. I'll probably get off on a few tangents, get a few things going, and we'll be here a while. But thanks everybody for tuning in, continuing to support. It's very noticed. It's very appreciated. Those people that have been continuing to listen, continuing to support. You guys don't know how much that means to me. It definitely means a lot. As I try to continue to grow this, as I get into this, it's still new to me. It's definitely encouraging to see that people are listening consistently. I really appreciate that. Thanks everybody that's been tuning in. If you haven't already, SA Sports _podcast on Instagram. Go follow me out on Instagram. I do post every time I make an episode. I try to get some other sports stuff up there as well. I ask questions up there. So I try to just engage with you guys. So definitely go follow me on Instagram, SA Sports, on YouTube. Go follow me there as well. And then I'm out on all the platforms, and SA Sports 913 at Gmail. If you ever hear something you want to talk about or have a question for me or any other inquiry for the show, those are the ways you can reach me. I'll say them again at the end if you didn't catch them as well. But one more time, just want to thank you guys for being here. And I do want to go ahead and hop into it since there is a lot for me to talk about today. I want to start off talking about baseball. I think ever since I went into catch-up mode for baseball, I fell behind. I didn't follow spring training as much as I normally do. Fell behind on baseball. And ever since I went into catch-up mode, I think baseball's moved to the top of the list for me, which is weird because the NBA's in the home stretch, and I have been watching the NBA a lot, but I think baseball's been a little bit more exciting for me personally right now, just watching the start of a new season, seeing how things come out of the gate. Eventually that'll die down for sure as the NBA continues to move to the playoff push. I'll be getting more and more in tune with that. And that's not to say that I haven't been watching NBA games or following them. It just it's not on the level of baseball for me right now. If you guys are getting overkilled with the baseball, that's why. I just been into baseball a lot. I've been doing a lot of my research and looking into a lot of different things for baseball. Definitely something that I'm passionate about right now, and it's going to come through in the podcast whether I want it to or not. You'll hear a lot of baseball talk from me, but that's just my excitement right now. It'll balance out eventually. It's a long baseball season. We're only in the first few weeks of the season, so it'll definitely balance out. But those of you that enjoy it, I won't stop, but it'll probably start to be a lot more NBA focused. NBA will probably move to the forefront for a little while as we get into the playoff push and all of that. But I do want to talk about baseball. The first biggest story is the Carlos Rodon no-hitter. I talked about the Joe Musgrove no-hitter on the last episode, on episode 5, I believe that was. I talked about his no-hitter and kind of pondered if there would be another one this year. And Carlos Rodon kind of one-upped him a little bit. He actually was really close to a perfect game. Those of you that watched that game, you were probably just as frustrated as I was with how the perfect game got broken up. Those of you that didn't get a chance to see it, the perfect game got broken up by a guy getting hit on basically barely getting hit on the toe of his back foot in the batter's box. Nicked his toe, something that in most cases guys get out of the way of. And it was definitely something that could have been prevented from derailing it. But of course, that wasn't what they were thinking. They were thinking about breaking that up and getting something going to win the game. You can't fault them for that, but it sucked to see the perfect game in that way, especially when Jose Abreu made a crazy good play in the 9th inning to get things going as well and get it close. I mean, that's not to say that there weren't other great plays throughout the game, but that one stood out just because it was right there in that pressure situation. But even still, being able to throw a no-hitter, 114 pitches, so an amazing game, which lets you know, it gives you an idea that he was pretty close to a perfect game because 114 pitches that's a good count to have, especially even in a no-hitter. You just wished he would have been able to get there. And then also, he had a lot of juice, even down to the end. In the bottom of the 9th inning, on top of the 9th inning, actually, I believe they were at home. But in the 9th inning, he actually threw a pitch faster than he had thrown in 3 years. He had a lot of juice. He was feeling it. It was his night. Shout out to Carlos Rodon. He's been through a lot of injuries, had a lot of things that was holding him down. I've seen him a decent amount just because being with Chicago and all of that, but he's definitely had a journey, and it's always good. Baseball is one of those sports that usually when somebody does something like this, they pretty much have a journey. Baseball and getting to the major leagues is a journey in and of itself. Guys make a lot of different stops a lot of times. They play in a lot of different places. They go to the draft multiple times. So just about everybody who plays in the major leagues has some kind of story. Other than those, there's always those guys in every sport that are just born to be it, always have it their whole life, and they get there, and that's what they were supposed to be. But most of these guys have a story, especially coming up in baseball. Shout out to Carlos Rodon. That was a fun game to watch. He was on it from jump. He was on it from the first pitch to the last pitch. It was his night. I mean, it was fun to watch for me. And even as a Royals fan, I want to see the White Sox lose as many games as possible, but you just can't, you can't substitute something like that. Watching a pitching performance like that is just something that you can't substitute. So it's always fun to watch those. With them coming so fast, we already have 2 in the first 3 weeks of the season. I have no doubt now that we'll probably see at least one more through this season. Probably even more than that. I think that's just kind of the law of averages at this point. There's a lot more baseball to be played. Somebody will have a day. Too many good pitchers in baseball as well. So somebody else will have a day. We'll see another no-hitter at some point. Hopefully some point soon so we can maybe even get another one. But we'll just keep the no-hitter watch going. I will always talk about it because even though I know baseball's dying out a little bit in the States, it's nothing like a no-hitter in sports. So you got to appreciate those. Not everybody does, but I definitely do. I love watching no-hitters. I think it's one of the harder things to do, even on a baseball field, just with so much talent in baseball. So I'll always talk about those. Anytime there is one, you guys will hear me talk about them. I'll let you guys know when they happen. So one more time, just want to tip my cap to Carlos Rodon. Congratulations on that. The long journey he had. Not knowing he was going to be even playing baseball just a few years back. I'm happy for him. Happy he got his moment. And hopefully he doesn't have any against the Royals this year. I'll just throw that in there as well. Secondly, I do want to talk about the Dodgers and the Padres. I talked about them in my MLB preview as being my 2 best teams in baseball this season. I still think that's the case. They will play each other 19 times this season, and they had their first series this past weekend. And actually, as I record this, they are starting their second series of the season. They're going to play a lot of baseball against one another, but that first series lived up to everything we were expecting and more. They had a 3-game series over the weekend. The first game went to extra innings. The score didn't reflect how close the game was because the Dodgers broke the game open in extras finally after they just went back and forth for a little bit. But even an extra inning game with a lot of suspense. You had Eric Hosmer tying the game up in the bottom of the 9th. It was a really fun game, which game 2 was even good. They had a runner in scoring position to tie the game in game 2. And then Mookie Betts just makes an amazing catch to Robert of another clutch hit, a game tying hit. That catch that he made to lay out on the diamond, and he barely even got it in his glove. But what a play it was he made. He knew he made the play from jump. And Mookie Betts is just one of those players, man. He makes plays like that look routine, but what that play was amazing. And to end the game like that, especially on a ball that should have been a hit, really, I think that was big time. So game 2 lived up to it as well. Of course, the Padres won the series after game 2, but with how good the games were, you still had to tune in to game 3. And then the Padres come from behind after being down 2-0 in that game, and they win that game coming from behind late. Eric Hosmer has the go-ahead RBI in that game as well. He had a really good series, actually, from what I was watching. He had a good series. Tatis looks like he was kind of knocking the rust off still a little bit. Will Myers was looking pretty good as well. Manny Mach, he's Manny Mach, still a really good player, still a guy you want in the lineup. That was a fun series to watch. I am excited to watch the rest of their games this year and follow both of those teams. The Dodgers have been the best team in baseball like we expected. The Padres haven't been very far behind them. It's still a shame that they're in the same division because I still think they're the 2 best teams in baseball. And I hate that they won't be able to actually play in the championship series. They'll have to play in the divisional round because most likely it'll be the Padres, but one of those teams will be in a wild card situation because they're both in the same division. I talked about that in the MLB preview. If you want a deeper dive on that, you can go check that out. It was the beginning of that episode. I'm not even going to try to guess the number, but it'll be in the description when you go look at the episodes. You can go check that out if you want to hear more kind of my deep dive into those 2 teams. But I would say, baseball fans, if you haven't been checking for those 2 teams anytime, but especially when they play each other, definitely check for them. Definitely tune into those games. They'll be nationally televised all season. I know that they'll put all those games on TV. They'll draw the ratings because they're the two best teams in baseball to me. So check those out. The next thing I wanted to talk about, Ronald Acuna. Ronald Acuna Jr. has been a budding superstar for the last couple of years in baseball. His breakout started this year of being a bona fide superstar. He's leading the National League in just about every hitting category there is. And he suffered a mild abdominal strain. And I just want to say that I hate that for him. I believe it's not going to keep him out too long. But that kid is looking amazing this season. He looks really good. He's a leadoff hitter that has power and speed. He's a rare 5-tool guy. He can do it all out there. He's one of the reasons why I've enjoyed watching the Braves over the last few years. I've always been a big Freddie Freeman fan anyway, so I've always paid attention. I've been seeing him since he was a younger guy anyway, but just seeing his ascent and seeing where he is today, he's legitimately one of the best players in baseball. He's a superstar. I talked about Fernando Tatis a little bit in my MLB preview as well. Ronald Acuna is breaking into that mode as well. There's going to be a handful of these guys that become the faces of Major League Baseball that I think Major League Baseball needs to capitalize on. They need to make sure that they market them correctly. Baseball needs a superstar, not just a transcendent superstar. Baseball fans are going to know who the best players are. That's not where the issue lies. It's people who transcend the game. There's so many people that don't regularly watch basketball that know who LeBron James is, or people that don't regularly watch football that know who Tom Brady is, or Peyton Manning, or guys like that, even current stars like Aaron Rodgers and Mahomes. And of course, Tom Brady's a current star. I'm not trying to slight him or anything like that, but he's kind of more of a legacy star. We talk about legacy acts in music a lot. I would say Tom Brady's more like a legacy star right now. There's nothing really left for him to accomplish that would change his legacy very much. We all know he's the best of all time, but the NFL's done a great job of marketing their players. The NBA does a great job of marketing their players and making sure that their players transcend the sport. And I think baseball needs to do a better job of that, because there are guys that are legitimately really good in baseball. And you're seeing this next wave of these young superstars coming up. And I think baseball, this is their chance to strike, because there's been a lot of changes recently about the pace of play and a lot of that stuff, just trying to get the fan base back, trying to get people back watching baseball regularly. And I know with the season being a grind, it's unless you cover baseball, it's hard to stay consistently interested unless you're a diehard baseball fan or you cover it or you play it or something like that. But I think those transcendent stars are going to be what gets baseball back on track and gets baseball back right there neck and neck with the other major sports leagues. So I think Ronald Acuna, I really hope for a speedy recovery from him, get him back out on the diamond. I think he's leading the National League in batting average, hits, home runs. I think he's leading the National League in just about every hitting category there is, which just speaks to how good he's been and how good of a player that he is in general. So we need him back ASAP so we can watch him play. I'm excited to watch him for the rest of the season as well. And if you are looking for reasons to watch teams outside of your own, he's going to be one of those reasons, along with some other guys that are out there as well. Shohei Ohtani is one that I didn't talk about in this conversation, but he's a reason to watch another team as well. I mean, you got a lot of other ones out there too, that just find those players that you like to watch or the style of play that you like to watch, and find those players, and there's going to be one out there for you to follow. There's a lot of good talent in baseball right now, a lot of really good players right now. Definitely something to keep in mind. Got two more things I want to touch on for baseball. The first one is Shane Bieber. I want to shout out Shane Bieber. He was the first pitcher ever to start a season with 4 straight 10 or more strikeout games. And he actually passed Nolan Ryan tied Nolan Ryan, for the most strikeouts of all time through first 4 games, and that was 48. Shane Bieber's been on a tear, and of course, a lot of you guys will know he was the American League Cy Young winner last year, which goes to the best pitcher. So yeah, he was the American League Cy Young winner last year. He's been on a tear to start this season. He doesn't look like he's going to relinquish that very easily. And that team, they're winning all of his games. That team's really not a good team as far as the lineup is concerned. The Royals will be battling the Indians in the division, just like they'll battle Twins and the White Sox. But that team, as far as the lineup is concerned, isn't the most talented or anything like that. But it seems like right now they're just guaranteed to win when he pitches, because he's pitching that well. So I just wanted to throw that out there. That's a record to start a season. When you see those, you got to at least point them out. Shout out to Shane Bieber. Glad he's doing what he's doing. He definitely blanked the Royals not too long ago, and he'll probably do that a couple more times before the season's up. He's just that good of a pitcher, and maybe he rides this momentum to another Cy Young award. We'll see how that all works out for him as the season progresses. And then the last thing I want to talk about, this isn't going to surprise a lot of people, but for me, every time I see that Steven Strasburg is injured, I hate it because he struggled with so many injuries. I have a soft spot in my heart for Steven Strasburg. While I was in high school following baseball, not a lot of people followed baseball at the time. Not a lot of younger kids were into baseball. That was one of those times where it was a lull a little bit. We did have some great World Series and different things like that, but it wasn't like a regular thing. But Steven Strasburg was a number one pick. If I'm not mistaken, he was a number one overall pick. And I remember when he first came to the majors with a lot of fanfare. And the first time I watched him pitch, I remember thinking, man, this dude is good. And I've always been a fan of his ever since then. I just remember the fanfare of him coming up. Him and then the other player who had a lot of fanfare, a lot of talk around them when they came up was Bryce Harper. Those two stand out to me during my high school days of players that had a lot of fanfare coming up. And of course, Bryce Harper has had his own struggles, but him coming up as a 19-year-old winning Rookie of the Year, I think that was something that you just don't see every day, and making great plays in the outfield. So I became a fan of his pretty quickly too. And then Steven Strasburg as well. Whenever you see those guys come up to fanfare and they live up to it, it's just fun to watch. I hope it's for a speedy recovery for Steven Strasburg as well. I hate when he goes down injured. I did think he deserved that World Series MVP that he won. I really enjoy watching Steven Strasburg pitch, and I know he still got some stuff left in the tank. So I hope he gets back into the rotation soon. I'm hoping for a speedy recovery from him. And as far as baseball, that's the last point that I wanted to make and talk about for baseball, which I got through that a little bit faster. I didn't go off on any real tangents like that. I went off on, I think, one about the young players, but I didn't get off on too many tangents. So I got through that a little bit faster than I thought. We might actually be tracking towards an episode that's not that long, but we'll see. As I say that now, I'll probably get off on a tangent here in the next segment or the last one. I want to go ahead and sandwich in the middle the NFL. NFL's in the offseason swing. I haven't been covering the draft. That's more so what a lot of the talk right now is in the NFL is the draft. I will do a draft preview show for the Chiefs, but I said this on episode 5.5 as well. I'm not really a talent evaluator. I do know how to watch film. I do know how to break down film, but I'm not really a player evaluator or a talent evaluator as much. I do want to say that eventually I may get into that, but that's not something that I'm thinking is going to be in the cards for now. But I will do a draft preview show for the Chiefs, just what I want to see them do and things like that. But as far as NFL news, with that kind of being the case, as far as NFL news, I do have a few things I want to talk about. I did talk about in one of the old podcasts that Jadeveon Clowney was looking like he was going to sign with the Browns. That did become official, but I wanted to talk about that because one of the other things that I talked about with that was that defensive line being pretty stout across the board, and I included Sheldon Richardson in that, but they actually did cut Sheldon Richardson. It saved them $11 million in cap space, so you can't blame them, but I think Sheldon Richardson's a really good player. If the Chiefs hadn't already signed Jaron Reed, I wouldn't have been opposed to the Chiefs going out and getting them to put on that defensive line next to Chris Jones as well, but Sheldon Richardson to bounce back. I saw him being a good piece of that defensive line, but they needed to save that cap space to afford guys like Clowney and other guys that they want to bring in. But Clowney going to the Browns, it's a decent story for the AFC. I don't know that it moves the needle a whole lot, but it does make their defense a little bit better. For sure, Jadeveon Clowney's a good player. For sure, he's going to bring some good things to that team. And congratulations to him for just continuing his career. It's crazy to think that he's not really like one of these transcendent guys that we thought he would be, but I think that's more expectation based than actual production based. I think he is one of the better edge players in the NFL, but a lot of people expect him to go out there and get 15 sacks a season and things like that. But that's really not the type of player he is. I think that's probably the biggest thing is that the expectations, and I think people underrate him because of the high expectations that he has and, him not tearing it up. But I do think he's still a good player. I think he will make that team better. The second thing I want to talk about is Alden Smith was arrested. New Seahawks defensive end Alden Smith was arrested over the weekend. Well, he turned himself in for a battery warrant. Apparently, there was a guy who reported that he assaulted him, and I just hate to see this. Alden Smith played his first season last year in the NFL. He played his first football since 2015, and he had a long hiatus. He had a lot of issues, a lot of things going on, substance abuse, run-ins with the law. He was really struggling in his personal life off the field, and you really were happy to see him bounce back last season, have a good year, keep his name out of the news. This news definitely sucks. I hope it can get sorted out and he can continue to play, but at the same time, if there's something if he needs to be punished for something, I understand that as well, and I know that's something that needs to happen. I am disappointed that happened. Alden Smith actually is locally from the Kansas City area. I believe he went to Grandview High School, and then also on the basketball side, they had Alec Burks who plays for the Knicks now, I believe. So who I'll talk about later, but I do think that he still has a future in the NFL if he can get past this issue, but he did have to be reinstated before even playing this past season. If this does come out that there was some wrongdoing on his behalf, there's a chance he could get suspended again and put on the NFL's list, the exemption list, I believe it's called, or something like that. Just keeping him in my thoughts. I hope he bounces back. I hope he ends up being able to play in Seattle. I know they were expecting him to come there and have another good year. Probably was knocking the rust off a little bit because if you guys remember, Alden Smith was one of the best players overall in the NFL during his time in San Francisco. He didn't really last a long time in Oakland. He only got to play a portion of that season, but he still looked dominant. But Alden Smith, during his time in San Francisco, he was a monster. He did a lot of good things. He was just troubled off the field, but he always had that potential to be a great player, and I think there's still something left in the tank. So I hope he gets his personal issues and the things that are affecting him off the field worked out so we can see him play and be dominant again. And then the last thing I want to talk about from an NFL perspective is Alex Smith. So Alex Smith announced his retirement. Alex Smith is probably one of the more enigmatic players, I think, of my lifetime, just because I remember Alex Smith coming out of Utah. I remember when he came out of Utah when he was playing for Urban Meyer and how good of a player he was as the number one overall pick. I remember him being that dude that could run. He could run his butt off, run around the field. I really genuinely believe that Alex Smith even paved the way for Tim Tebow at Florida later on under Urban Meyer, just with the type of player that he was and the success that Alex Smith had. So seeing him come in as a number one pick, and then he had a lot of early struggles in San Francisco. And there were two camps on Alex Smith. There was one camp that still saw the talent in him, that still thought he could still be a really good NFL quarterback. And then there was another camp that they didn't, because another thing about his time in San Francisco was he had a lot of different head coaches. He had a lot of different offensive coordinators in his first handful of seasons to where he could never really get comfortable with somebody that were on the way out the door. I'm trying to think of some of those coaches. The only one that I can think of right now is Mike Singletary. And I know he didn't spend a lot of time as the coach for that team either, but there were some other coaches as well during that time that weren't really that good at coaches and weren't really that successful during their time there, and they always would bring their own offensive coordinator. So he's changing offensive coordinators and head coaches every couple of years, and he never really got a chance to get comfortable until Harbaugh came around. And then Harbaugh comes around, he's having this great year. I believe the team was undefeated at the time in 2012. I believe it was the 2011-2012 season, or it may have been the 2012-2013 season. One of those 2 years, maybe, that the team's undefeated. Alex Smith suffers a concussion. He has to miss some time. Colin Kaepernick comes in. He provides some juice to the lineup. The team keeps winning with that same foundation, and they stick with Kaepernick for the rest of the season. And they do make that run to the Super Bowl, and it changes everything because Kaepernick became the guy there in San Francisco. But Alex Smith had started to hit his stride that year, and then to see him get his job taken to injury really sucked for him. And then the Chiefs go out, they trade for him from the 49ers, and he goes and he has a really productive career with the Kansas City Chiefs. He brings the Chiefs back to the playoffs in his first year there. They went from a 2-win team to a 9-win team in his first year. And for all the knocks on Alex Smith and all the things that people said he didn't do, one thing that he always did was win. Alex Smith quarterbacked a lot of winning teams, and that's something that you can't take away from him. And then, of course, he has his chapter in Kansas City. They draft Patrick Mahomes to be his successor. Mahomes sits behind him for a year. We all saw what Mahomes could do in the Week 17 game of Alex Smith's last year starting. And then after that, the rest was pretty much history. He ends up getting traded to Washington in a trade that a lot of people probably saw coming, just with Mahomes pushing Alex Smith out of the way. A lot of people saw that coming. Alex Smith ends up in Washington and is productive there as well. Alex Smith has been productive. He's won games everywhere he's been. He suffers that gruesome leg injury. We've all heard about that. He had a multitude of surgeries. I can't remember the number. There was a great documentary on Alex Smith. It really raises your respect for him as a man. He almost lost his life, even just bigger than football. There was so much stuff going on with him outside of football. He almost lost his leg. He almost lost his life due to infection. He had a lot of things going on during that time. And to see him fight for a few years to get back on the field and actually start another NFL game, to play in another NFL game, to start another NFL game and win games. It was just amazing. He was probably the most well-deserving comeback player of the year that I remember in my lifetime. Just everything that he went through. And of course, you had Eric Berry with the cancer, and that was a big deal as well. That was probably second, but Alex Smith just everything he went through. If you watch that documentary, I believe it was called Project 11. If anybody wants to check that out, I think it was an ESPN Plus documentary. It's probably still out there somewhere. Don't quote me on the name or the platform. It's been a little while since I watched that, but I believe that's what it was. But either way it goes, Alex Smith is somebody that I think was probably a little bit underrated throughout his career. He was a guy that, for me growing up in Kansas City, I always have fond memories of Alex Smith because he was the beginning of the end of a lot of dark times as a fan of the Chiefs. I'm forever, grateful to Alex Smith. I think he's a Chiefs legend. I think he belongs in the Chiefs Ring of Honor just for the franchise that he came into and inherited and how bad the quarterback play had been and how he came in and steadied that. He genuinely laid the foundation for the Chiefs being who they are today, with just guys expecting to win games, guys knowing how to go about it the right way. And I think that's something that I'll always remember fondly about Alex Smith. But there's a lot of football fans in Utah and in San Francisco and in Washington that'll also remember him fondly. And that's something that I think is awesome. And he has his chance to get his flowers now. He got his chance to get his comeback player of the year, to prove to himself and prove to the league that he was a fighter. He got a chance to get back on the field and overcome those injuries and be able to play again. I'm excited for him to open up his next chapter. I think he could eventually bounce back as a coach, so we could see that also happening. But congratulations to Alex Smith on a great career. Not a lot of guys live up to being a number one pick, and he had a rough path to be in there, but I would say he definitely lived up to it and proved that not only was he a great football player, but a great guy as well. Congratulations to him. Shout out to him and his family on the special time for them as well. And that was the last thing I wanted to talk about NFL-wise. I'm actually making really good time in this episode. It'll probably end up being shorter than episode 5.5. But I have a lot of NBA things that I want to talk about. So it could also not be shorter, depending on how I get off on this tangent. But the first NBA story that I want to talk about is the New York Knicks being on a winning streak. I think we all knew that the Knicks would be better with Tom Thibodeau as their coach. I don't know if we knew that they would get this much better. I think that getting this much better was a mystery and something that's a pleasant surprise. They've got a lot of guys that it's not hard to root for. Of course, Julius Randle, the all-star on their team. Julius Randle is having a stellar season. He's taken a huge step, which he took a step last year as well. I think it was just a little bit quieter because he didn't have the big stats in these big 40-point games stringing together, and then the team wasn't winning. People didn't pay attention as much. But Julius Randle has been on this trajectory for the last 2 seasons. But this year, he's just a bona fide star in the NBA. He should be on an all-NBA team. He's been one of the best players. If you haven't gotten a chance to watch him play, you should watch him play. Julius Randle is one of those guys that, if you guys remember, even at Kentucky, he's always been like a hybrid type of player. And I think he's now figured out how to do that in the NBA because he was always an above average passer for his size. He was always an above average ball handler. He was always way stronger than the average guy. He was always way stronger than the people who were going to be guarding him or the average guy at his position. So he's always had a unique set of skills. And I think now he's finally putting them all together and figuring out how to use them at the NBA level to his advantage best. And then you have a team that's playing great defense under Tom Thibodeau, which is something that we know we're going to see from a team of his. They've got some vets on the team. They've got some young guys on the team. You talk about Julius Randle and Derrick Rose and Taj Gibson and those guys. And then you have younger guys on the team like RJ Barrett and Kevin Knox and those guys as well. So they've got a really good core group of players. They're going to make the playoffs, which is something that I think Knicks fans will be happy about. And I think the NBA is just a little bit more fun when the Knicks are good. There's just something about it, about the Knicks being good. It just adds a little bit of juice to the league overall. Definitely excited to see the Knicks winning games. I'm a Celtics fan for those of you guys that don't know. So I hope they lose a couple of games so my Celtics can pass them for the fourth seed and get home court. But either way it goes, I think that the Knicks are actually a legitimately good team. They're going to be a tough out in the playoffs. They're going to push somebody because they got veterans and then they've got a star. They've got Julius Randle, who on any given night, he can be the best player on the floor. And that's not something you can take lightly in the playoffs. When you have a guy who can be the best player on the floor in a certain game, you have a shot to win a game or two, at least. So we'll see how the season finishes out for them. But I did want to go ahead and give them their props. They're winning games. Tom Thibodeau came in there and turned that thing around, and he's doing a great job there, which he always does a great job. He always has teams winning. I think Minnesota was that bump in the road for him, but for the most part, he's going to have teams playing well. I'm excited to see how this continues to materialize. I think with the Knicks being so bad for so long, they've had the opportunity to stockpile some good talent while also that free agency class where they didn't get KD and those guys. And when they traded Porzingis away, I think that ended up being a blessing now because they have other vets that have filled out that roster pretty nicely. So I think that they don't have a superstar. They don't have that number one ace guy. Julius Randle could be on his path to being that. I'm not going to take that away from him, but if he was going to be their guy, their centerpiece, then if they want to compete for championships, they're going to have to go get another guy like him, another all-star level player at least. So we'll see how they go from this season. But for this season, Knicks fans enjoy that. NBA fans enjoy that. It's more fun when the Knicks are in the playoffs and when the Knicks are a factor. Everybody enjoy that while we can. And I just want to shout them out. My second NBA thing I want to talk about, I just want to give an update on where I think the MVP race is right now. I think that there's a 1A and a 1B. There's a tie for me atop this list, and I want to see how the season finishes up. And that tie is between Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid. I think both of them are having outstanding seasons. Joel Embiid averaging 30 points, 11 rebounds, a block and a steal a game. Nikola Jokic averaging 26 points, 10 rebounds, 8 assists a game, and just being a facilitator for his team. And now without Jamal Murray as well, that adds another wrinkle to this. And of course, another thing to note for Joel Embiid is that his team is in first place. So I think Nikola Jokic probably has the better opportunity right now with no Jamal Murray just being able to step into being the guy on the team. And if he can lead that team to not missing too much of a beat, I think that he could lock this award up. You just don't see a big man, a guy of his size and stature averaging 8 assists, but also a guy like Joel Embiid who can score back to the basket, score from the face-up game. He can score from the free throw line area. He can make threes. I think the last I checked, he was shooting like 38% on his three-pointers. And then he's a defensive hound. He's a rim protector. Really good defensive player. And I think Doc Rivers has just unlocked another level of his game. That's going to be a tough one to call, but I think they're like 1A, 1B for me. If I had to cast my vote today, it would probably go to Joel Embiid just because I think when watching both of those guys, you watch Joel Embiid and he just dominates everybody. And that's not to say that Nikola Jokic isn't dominant in his own way. I just think that Joel Embiid has that effect. I don't want to say this because it's going to sound crazy, but he has that Shaquille O'Neal effect where when he's on the floor, the entire game changes for everybody else that's out there on the floor with him. And I think even to a farther extent because he can shoot and he can play all the way out to the three-point line. I think it even takes it to a different level than Shaq. Maybe not as dominant down low, not as physically imposing, just as far as the size. And that probably speaks a lot more to just there being a lot more talent in the NBA and then big guys not just banging down low all the time. But he just physically dominates a game and you have to adjust to it. I think Jokic is a little bit different in that he's just that point forward that he facilitates so well that he's going to score, he's going to rebound, he's going to get a lot of assists because he's the guy who initiates their offense. He's the one who's calling the shots for the team. Both guys really great in their own. I probably would cast my vote for Embiid right now, but watching Nikola Jokic down the stretch of the season and seeing where the Nuggets end up at is going to be huge for me in determining who I think the MVP is at the end of the year. The rest of my top five, I'll just name them: Luka Doncic, Giannis, and Dame. I don't know where each of those guys are. They're just like the rest of my top five in that. I think all three of those guys are having stellar seasons. I think Damian Lillard has probably been an MVP candidate for the last few years. He doesn't get enough love for that, but it's probably just with Portland always being just right there in the middle of the pack in the West, and in the way that he plays the game. He's not like an imposing type of player, and he doesn't just make a whole bunch of threes like Steph. But I do think that he should have been getting some MVP love. Giannis probably won't win it again just because of fatigue. Voters aren't going to vote for him 3 years in a row, but he's definitely still having a great season. I would pick Jokic or Embiid over him this year, though, for sure, especially with Embiid having the 76ers supplanting not only the Bucks, who have been atop the Eastern Conference for a while, but also the Nets, who are a bona fide super team, and the Sixers are still outpacing them. And they haven't had Ben Simmons for a while. Joel Embiid's missed a little bit of time. So they've been doing this kind of with a ragtag group at times as well. I think that also is another factor that plays into that. But I'm excited to watch the MVP race down the stretch of the season. I think it'll tighten up. I think it's tighter than it's been in a while because you have guys doing things we just haven't seen in a while. I'm ready to watch it. I'm ready to see where everything ends up at. The next thing I want to talk about, and I mentioned his name when I was talking about Dame Lillard, is Steph Curry. He did just have his streak of 30-point games in, but he did pass Kobe for the most 30-point games in a row for a guy 33 or older. Steph Curry was on a tear. If you got a chance to watch him during that run, you were in for a treat. It was one of them. It's something about watching Steph Curry play basketball. It's just different from anything else that you'll see as far as basketball is concerned. It's just fun. The way that he plays is fun. The way that the Warriors play is fun. And it's just a treat to watch. It was something to marvel at for sure. And I want to make sure I shout him out because I think now with Steph being his back-to-back MVP, with him having his championships and validating his career already, he's starting to fall into one of those modes of nothing that he does impresses us anymore. And I think LeBron's in that place now. But Steph Curry's there. Nothing that he does impresses us anymore. So we have to be intentional about saying, hey, this is not normal. This is something that we need to pay attention to because it's not normal. It's kind of something that I talked about in one of my earlier podcasts with Russell Westbrook and his triple doubles. It's the same thing with that. With his triple doubles, once he started just doing that, Russell Westbrook became one of those guys where it's just he gets a triple double. Oh, that's okay. That's just what he does. Or he gets called a stat stuffer or whatever. And I think Steph Curry, he makes 10 threes in a game and it's just like, oh yeah, that's Steph. So it's the same thing there as well. It's really interesting to think about if you think about it, how quickly we can get fatigued with these guys. But Steph Curry has not been playing normal, and I think he realizes that he has to be supernatural for that team to win games on a consistent basis. And they were winning games and playing well during that stretch. And that's because of Steph. Steph's having 40-point games, 50-point games. And then, of course, his 30-point games, which they look like they're dwarfed by 54-point games where he makes 10 threes or just crazy things like that. So I think it's something to appreciate, and it's something that we have to make sure we don't take for granted when paying attention to Steph Curry. He's a guy I want to watch down the stretch of the season. Of course, the team success isn't there for him to win MVP, but I'd argue he's probably one of the most valuable players to his team in the NBA, bar none, actually. You think about that Warriors team last year without Steph, and they were the worst team in the NBA. And now this year, of course, they're not one of the best teams in the NBA, but they're at least competing for the play-in tournament with Steph Curry. And you think about them getting Klay Thompson back next year, and you can see the Warriors right back in the thick of things with the way that they've been able to add a little bit of talent to that team. You got your Steph, you got Klay, you got Draymond Green, and then you have those surrounding guys, depending on what kind of step you can get out of James Wiseman, and Andrew Wiggins is there now. Oubre probably won't end up being there. I don't think he's fitting what they want to do. And that's why his playing time is dwindling down a little bit, but definitely a team to watch out for. Even this year, I don't think anybody wants to play against Steph Curry and the Warriors in the playoffs. I don't think anybody wants to play against them. You got to watch out for that, because if they sneak their way into that play-in tournament and they somehow win that tournament, people are going to be nervous about playing against the Warriors. And that's not to say that they'll win a series, but you get a guy in Steph Curry that can just score 50 any night or every night in a series, it changes the whole series. It changes the complexion of a series. And you're talking about them potentially playing against a team like Utah, who, while Utah's been really good this year, Utah's still relatively unproven in the Western Conference playoffs, as far as if we know that they can make a deep run. So that's not a team that I would go into that series just definitively comfortable with saying that they beat the Warriors down with a guy like Steph Curry, who's been there. Definitely just something to keep an eye on. I've gotten off on a tangent a little bit just talking about this topic, but it's just watching Steph Curry is exciting. There's nothing like it. I don't remember anything like it in my lifetime. And of course, I got to see the second best shooter of all time, Ray Allen. But for now, I personally think that Damian Lillard probably will end his career as the second best shooter. And if Steph Curry didn't exist, we would be talking about Damian Lillard like we talk about Steph Curry now. I do think that Ray Allen, though, watching Ray Allen was still a little bit different than watching Steph Curry. It's just something different about Steph, and it's fun to watch, and it's something we need to appreciate. So if you haven't gotten a chance to watch him on this run he's been on, at least try to tune in and watch him down the stretch of the season as he tries to will that team to the playoffs. It's been fun to watch for sure. The next thing I want to talk about is LaMelo Ball should be coming back soon. As you guys know, I really LaMelo Ball as a prospect and a player. I don't know if he can get Rookie of the Year anymore. Anthony Edwards has really turned it up since LaMelo Ball got hurt, but I'm excited to see him come back and try to compete for it. I'm ready to get him back on the court and watch him play again, but Anthony Edwards has definitely filled that void. And I know I talked about him not necessarily struggling, but I did talk about him not really looking like a number one pick. And it seems like right around when LaMelo Ball started having his injury issues, Anthony Edwards turned it on. Anthony Edwards has been a really good player. I've gotten a chance to watch him a couple of times over this. He just looks like he fits. He just needed a little bit of time to acclimate in with the way that he plays the game. And I really think he's going to be good in the league as well. I think that the Timberwolves found another star to put next to Karl Anthony Towns. I just don't know if they have enough there to make any solid playoff runs, but I think that remains to be seen with how good Anthony Edwards becomes. So we'll keep watching him as well. We'll keep watching LaMelo Ball. The battle for Rookie of the Year down the stretch of the season should be fun. I think with LaMelo Ball missing so much time, Anthony Edwards probably ends up winning it, but we can see LaMelo Ball come back and drop some triple doubles and get his name back in there. I'm excited to watch that unfold as well for the rest of the season. The last thing I want to talk about is kind of more of a question that I asked myself the other day. I was watching the Nets play, and a thought came into my head because you had KD on the sideline, you had Harden on the sideline, you had Blake Griffin on the sideline. They didn't really have anybody playing in that game. But the question that I posed to myself about this Nets team is, are they becoming the Clippers of last year? If you guys remember, the Clippers put together this super team, this team that was supposed to challenge the Lakers, and they looked like it for most of the season. But Paul George and Kawhi Leonard really didn't play a lot of games together. Paul George would miss a game here, and then Kawhi would miss a game, or vice versa. And then other guys that were part of the equation were also missing games as well. But they were still good enough to at least win in the regular season. So I think that they got a little complacent on how good that they were, or if they were good enough to really win, which I thought was interesting. But it made me think about that with the Nets. Of course, the Brooklyn Nets, I think the Brooklyn Nets are much, much more talented. They have a lot more firepower than that team in LA did last year. But it just poses the question of how much time do you need together before the postseason to really get in rhythm? That team hasn't really spent a lot of time together with all three of those guys. I think Harden, KD, and Kyrie Irving have only been in the lineup at the same time for 7 games, which just isn't enough time. And James Harden did just have a setback with his hamstring, which is a pretty big deal because we don't know when he's going to be back anymore. And I do think with a healthy KD and healthy Kyrie, I think the Nets can still make it to the finals without him, but I don't think they can definitively win the championship without him. I think they got a shot. I wouldn't, necessarily count them out in the finals without James Harden, but I do think that they would need him to definitively say they're the best team and for me to pick them definitively. But I guess that question posed in my head when I was watching that game is just like, are they becoming that team of last year? Because I don't think anybody still expected the Clippers to lose before the Western Conference Finals the way that they did. That was a surprise to everybody. So I don't think anybody expected that at all. But it ended up happening, and I think it was because they didn't get a chance to work out the kinks on the team, get comfortable playing with one another. There was a lot of petty things going on with the team that if they would have played more games together, they could have figured that stuff out during the regular season. And I think that with the way this Nets team has been thrown together this year, we could see the same thing. And even with the Clippers, a factor that they didn't even have that this Nets team has, that Doc Rivers had been the coach there in LA for a long time. This is Steve Nash's first year as an NBA head coach in general. So to throw this team together with those big personalities and a lot of new players, pretty much all of the players in the main rotation are new just about. So you got a lot of new players, a lot of new faces, a new coach, and then they're not playing together. So I think it's going to be hard to really know what you fully have out of them with them only playing 7 games together so far. That question came up in my head. It's just, are they becoming that team of last year? And I don't necessarily know that it's going to be the Clippers, but that's just the most recent analogy that I could make to this team. But it still is, I think, at least a valid question is that will they have enough time playing together by the time the postseason rolls around to really be a threat and really be a championship contender, especially if James Harden isn't back and 100% by then. I think that could also show some vulnerability with how good the 76ers have been. I think it could end up being a very similar situation. You had an upstart Denver Nuggets team knock that Clippers team out. I could very well see it under the right circumstances. If Ben Simmons is healthy, I could very well see that 76ers team knocking out the Nets. Not with everybody back and everybody healthy. The Nets are a lot better team than they are. They're a lot more talented, and that'll show in a 7-game playoff series. But if they're sputtering into the playoffs, James Harden really hasn't played a lot or doesn't look in rhythm. We already know the struggles that he's been prone to having in the playoffs anyway, even without injury. I think coming in with injury on a new team as not the number one guy, which other than his time in Oklahoma City, he's never been in that situation before. So you got to think about all of those factors that are going to play into this when you think about that Nets team. But I think it's at least worth posing the question to say, are they going to be great? Are they going to be this team that we expect them to be in the playoffs? And I think with 2 guys who are champions, 2 guys who have been big in these big moments in the playoffs, they're going to be ready for the moment. But playing together under a new coach, it's going to be a lot different. I'm excited to see how it all works out, what all happens with that. I'm excited to see the NBA season kind of wrap up down the stretch and just see how both conferences shake out and how teams finish. So we'll see how that all works out for Brooklyn going forward. But that was my last thing I wanted to talk about. So I did end up keeping this episode a little bit shorter than the last one. I appreciate you guys that are still hanging in here and listening with me. And I hope you guys are enjoying the content as well. I'll post some stuff out about this episode. You guys go answer my questions and make sure you engage out on the Instagram page, SA_Sports_podcast. I will post this on the YouTube channel, SA Sports or Something About Sports Podcast. And then for other questions or things you want to suggest to me, inquiries about the show, sasports913@gmail.com. One more time, I just want to thank you guys for being here, for continuing to listen to me and continuing to enjoy my content. And that's all I have for you guys today. So until next time.